My name is Eleanor Vance, and 3 weeks ago I sat in a lawyer's office and watched my entire family discover that everything they thought they knew about my grandmother's estate was wrong. My parents had spent 2 years telling me I was being cut out. My sister Brielle had already picked out the kitchen renovations for a house that wasn't hers yet. My mother had whispered to relatives at Thanksgiving that I had disappointed the family, that Grandma Ruth had finally seen what they'd always seen in me, nothing. So when the lawyer slid the will across the table and read the names, I watched my sister smile. I watched my father exhale like a man who'd just won a long game. And then the lawyer paused. He cleared his throat. He looked at me, not at them. "There is a second document," he said. "Filed 11 months ago. It supersedes everything you've just heard." What none of them knew was that I had spent the last year of my grandmother's life sitting beside her hospital bed while they were too busy. What they didn't know was that Grandma Ruth had asked me one quiet question that changed everything, and that I had a folder in my bag that the lawyer already had a sealed copy of. Before I tell you what happened next, hit like and subscribe, drop your city and local time below. I genuinely love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back, because to understand the silence in that room, you have to understand a kitchen, a woman, and a promise made over a cup of weak tea. The first place I ever felt safe was Grandma Ruth's kitchen on Maple Hollow Road. It was a small house, the kind that creaks when the heat comes on, with floral wallpaper in the hallway that had faded to the color of old letters. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and dish soap and a particular warmth of bread that had been baked so many times the walls themselves had learned the recipe. There was a yellow clock above the stove shaped like a sunflower, and it ticked a half-second too slow, so the whole room felt like it ran on its own gentle time. I was 7 the first time I stayed there for a full week. My parents had gone somewhere, I don't even remember where now, only that there hadn't been room for me. Grandma Ruth never made it feel that way. She made it feel like I was the room. "Sit," she'd say, patting the chair beside her at the small wooden table by the window. The seat cushions were thin and worn, and the table had a water ring near the edge that she refused to sand out. "That ring," she told me once, "is from your grandfather's coffee mug. Some marks you keep on purpose." She taught me how to knead dough, pressing my small hands under hers, showing me how to feel when it stopped fighting back. She taught me to play gin rummy and never once let me win on purpose, which I understood later was its own kind of respect. In the evenings we sat on the back porch and watched the light go soft and amber over the garden, and she'd tell me about her life in pieces, like she was handing me one puzzle piece at a time. One evening, when I was maybe 10, I asked her why she always saved the burnt cookie for herself and gave me the good ones. She laughed, a low warm sound. "Because love isn't about what's left over, Ellie. Love is about what you choose first." She looked at me over her glasses. "Remember that. When people show you what they choose first, believe them." I didn't understand it then. I thought she was just being soft, the way grandmothers are. I didn't know she was teaching me how to read people. I didn't know she was teaching me how to survive my own family. My house, my parents' house in Brookfield, was a different climate entirely. It was bigger, newer, colder. Everything in it was arranged for how it looked rather than how it felt. The couch was white and we weren't allowed to sit on it. The dining room was for company, which meant it was never for me. My mother kept the thermostat low and her affection lower, distributed carefully, like a budget that always seemed to run short by the time it reached me. At Grandma Ruth's, I was never a line item. I was the whole reason she'd put the kettle on. My sister Brielle was born when I was 4, and from the moment she arrived, I understood my role in the family. I was the practice child, and she was the masterpiece. It was never stated outright. It rarely is. Favoritism in families isn't a single loud event, it's 1,000 quiet arithmetic decisions. Brielle's recitals were attended, my science fairs were this weekend already crazy. Brielle's bad moods were if she's sensitive, mine were if she's difficult. When Brielle wanted to study fashion in another state, my parents found the money. When I asked for help with my first year of nursing school, my father sighed and said, "We're not made of money, Eleanor. You'll figure it out." You always do. And I did. I worked nights at a care facility and went to class in the mornings and learned how to function on 4 hours of sleep and a stubbornness I inherited, I think, from the woman on Maple Hollow Road. Money was the language my parents spoke fluently and used carelessly. My father, Roland, had a way of measuring people by their usefulness. My mother, Diane, measured them by their appearance. Brielle fit both categories effortlessly. I fit neither, and I learned to stop auditioning. The first time I heard the word estate in our house, I was 23, home for a holiday I almost skipped. I came down for a glass of water and heard my parents in the den, voices lowered the way people lower them when the subject is delicious and slightly shameful. The house alone has to be worth $350, my father was saying. And mother's got those bonds. The accounts. It adds up. We should talk to her about updating things, my mother replied. Make sure it's all organized properly. So it goes where it should. Where it should. I stood in the dark hallway with my empty glass and felt something cold settle in my chest. They weren't talking about my grandmother. They were talking about her death, in present tense, like reviewing an inventory. On the kitchen counter the next morning, I found a glossy brochure half-tucked under the fruit bowl. Sterling Estate Planning, Protect What Matters. There was a sticky note on it in my mother's handwriting, Call Mom. Brielle? Brielle. Not me. Of course not me. I put the brochure back exactly where I'd found it, the way you set down something you've decided to remember. I didn't say anything. I'd learned by then that the people who count your slices are not the people who love you. They're the people Grandma Ruth had warned me about. When people show you what they choose first, believe them. I was beginning to believe them. Grandma Ruth got sick the autumn I turned 26. It started small, a cough that wouldn't quit, a tiredness that sat on her like a wet coat. By winter, the doctors had a name for it, and the name didn't come with good news. She had maybe a year, they said, if things went gently. Things rarely go gently. Here's what I want you to understand. In the 18 months that followed, I was there. Not because I expected anything. I was a nurse, sitting beside the sick was the one thing I knew how to do with my whole heart. I drove the 40 minutes to Maple Hollow Road 4 times a week. I managed her medications. I learned which blankets she liked. I read to her when her own eyes got too tired. I held the basin when the treatments turned her stomach, and I held her hand when they turned her quiet. And my family? My parents visited twice. Brielle came once, took photographs for her social media, spending precious time with Grandma Whiteheart, and left after 40 minutes because the smell of the hospital upset her. But as Grandma Ruth got weaker, something in my family got stronger. Hungrier. The phone call started. My mother, suddenly attentive, to me, of all people, fishing. How is she, really? Is she saying anything? About arrangements? My father, casually, does she still have that lawyer fellow handling things? The accounts and such? One evening in early spring, I was at my parents' house dropping off a casserole my mother had asked me to make for the family, and I heard them in the den again. I'd gotten good at standing very still in that hallway. Just makes sense to have Brielle as the executor, my mother was saying. Eleanor's a nurse, she doesn't understand finances. Brielle's practical. Brielle's voice now, light and certain, and honestly, the house should come to me. I'm the one who'd actually keep it nice. Eleanor would let it fall apart. My father, the verdict, we'll talk to mother. She trusts us. We'll make sure it's done right before she's too far gone to sign. Before she's too far gone to sign. They wanted to rewrite a dying woman's wishes while she still had the strength to hold a pen. They wanted to use her trust against her. And they had already, in that den, in that single sentence, replaced me, the one who showed up, with the one who showed up for the photo. I drove home that night and pulled over twice because I couldn't see the road through the crying. It wasn't the money. I swear to you it was never the money. It was the casserole still warm on their counter, made by my hands, for a family that had just calmly decided I was nothing. I almost didn't tell Grandma Ruth. I told myself it would only hurt her, that a dying woman shouldn't carry the weight of her own children's greed. But Ruth Vance had not survived 81 years by being protected from the truth. She survived by knowing exactly where she stood. It was a Tuesday. The light through her bedroom window was that pale gold she loved. I was straightening her blankets when she caught my wrist with a grip that surprised me. Still strong, still hers. "You've been carrying something heavy, Ellie. 4 weeks. Out with it." So I told her. Not cruelly, not all at once. But I told her about the brochure, the den, the phrase "before she's too far gone to sign." I watched her face, braced for tears. She didn't cry. She laughed, a dry, sharp, almost satisfied laugh that turned into a cough. "Oh, Roland," she said, shaking her head. "He always did think I was a foolish old woman." She looked at me, and her eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in months. "Get me the blue address book. Top drawer of my dresser. There's a card tucked in the back." I found it. A simple ivory business card, soft at the corners from age. Marcus Holloway, attorney at Law Estates and Trusts. On the back, in Grandma's slanted handwriting, "Call only when you're ready, Ellie. You'll know when." My hands went cold. "Grandma. What is this?" "That," she said, settling back against the pillows with the faintest smile, "is a man I trust more than I trust my own son. Which, I'll admit, is a low bar." She closed her eyes. "Put it somewhere safe. Don't call him yet. There are things in motion you don't need to understand yet. But you will." "What things?" "The kind," she said, "that are written down and witnessed, so that no one can pretend they didn't happen." She squeezed my hand one last time. "I chose first a long time ago, Ellie. I just never told the people who don't deserve to know." I slipped the card into the inner pocket of my bag. I didn't call. But I started watching everything more carefully, and I started writing down dates. Grandma Ruth passed in late summer, on a morning so quiet I could hear the sunflower clock ticking from the next room. I was holding her hand. None of them were there. I called the family. Then, 3 days after the funeral, a funeral my parents used to network, shaking hands and accepting condolences for a woman they'd planned to outmaneuver, I finally turned that ivory card over in my fingers and dialed. Marcus Holloway's office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, all dark wood and the smell of leather and printer toner. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair and the unhurried manner of a man who had watched a great many families fall apart across that very desk and was no longer surprised by any of it. "Eleanor Vance," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Ruth spoke about you often. You were the one who came." It wasn't a question. He sat, folded his hands, and looked at me with something close to gentleness. "Your grandmother was a remarkable client. Do you understand why she gave you my card?" "No," I admitted. "She said I'd know when." He nodded slowly. "Then let me explain, because there are things you need to understand before the official reading next week." He opened a folder. 2 years ago, your mother and father arranged for your sister to bring your grandmother to a different attorney. A new will was drawn up. In it, the house, the bonds, the accounts, the bulk of an estate worth roughly $600,000, were left to your sister, Brielle, with your parents named as overseers. You were left $10,000 and, I quote, her appreciation. The room tilted. So they'd done it. They'd actually done it. "That will," Marcus continued, "is the one your family is expecting to hear read. It is, on its face, valid." "On its face," I repeated. A small smile. 11 months ago, your grandmother came to me, alone, sharp as ever, with 2 independent witnesses and a physician's letter confirming her sound mind. She executed a new will. The most recent will. It revokes everything that came before." He turned the folder toward me. I saw my grandmother's signature, dated, "Witnessed." She left $10,000 to your sister, he said quietly. She left a modest sum each to two charities. And she left the house on Maple Hollow Road, the bonds, and the entirety of her accounts, to you. I couldn't speak. He waited, kind enough to let me not speak. There's more, he said. Your grandmother anticipated they'd contest it. So she recorded a video statement with me as witness, explaining her reasoning in her own words and demonstrating her clarity. She also left a sealed letter, to be opened only by you, after the reading. He paused. She knew exactly what she was doing, Eleanor. She wanted you to walk into that room knowing you held the truth, and she wanted them to learn it the same way they'd treated her. Without warning. Then he told me the part that turned my grief into resolve. My parents and Brielle had already, before the reading, begun arranging to list the house. They had a realtor. They were moving fast, certain. They had no idea the ground beneath them had quietly shifted. The reading was set for the following Friday. 6 days. I want to be honest with you about those 6 days, because they were some of the hardest of my life, and I think some of you will understand exactly why. I could have told them. Part of me ached too. Part of me wanted to call my mother and say, "You missed. The pen you used was already out of ink." But Marcus had advised me, gently and firmly, say nothing. If they suspect, they may attempt to muddy things, file early objections, pressure you. Let the process protect you. Let the document speak. So I said nothing. And they, mistaking my silence for defeat, grew bolder. Day 5, my mother called. Eleanor, sweetheart. The endearment landed like a coin dropped in an empty jar. We should talk about the reading. Now, I know mothers may surprise you. But you have to understand, she wasn't always thinking clearly toward the end. We did what was best for the family. What's best for the family, I echoed. Brielle's going to keep the house and the family. You'll get a little something. And honestly, between us, you're so independent, you don't need it the way Brielle does. You've always landed on your feet. Always landed on my feet. As if the ground hadn't been pulled out from under me my entire life, and I'd simply learned to fall well. I understand, I said. And I did. I understood completely. Day 4, Brielle texted me a photo of paint swatches. Thinking sage green for Grandma's kitchen herb. You can have her recipe box if you want, no biggie. The recipe box. The one with the burned-edged card for the cookies she always kept for herself. No biggie. Day 3, my father cornered me at the funeral home where we were settling the last of the arrangements. Now, when we go in Friday, let's keep it civil. No scenes. Marcus Holloway is handling it, old fellow, your grandmother's man. Should be straightforward. He clapped my shoulder, the warmest gesture he'd offered me in a decade. He was being kind because he thought he'd won. Kindness, in my family, was a victory lap. Let me ask you something, and I really do read these. Have you ever had to stay completely silent while someone celebrated taking something from you, knowing the whole time that they were wrong, and that the truth was coming on its own schedule, not theirs? Tell me in the comments. Tell me how you held your tongue. Because I'll be honest, I almost didn't. Each night that week I sat with the sealed letter Marcus had given me, my grandmother's handwriting on the front, for Ellie. After. I didn't open it. She'd told me when. I trusted her on the timing the way I'd trusted her on everything else. I just had to make it to Friday. 8. Public confrontation scene. Marcus Holloway's conference room was warm with afternoon light and tension. My parents arrived dressed for the occasion, my mother in pearls, my father in the navy blazer he wore to seem trustworthy. Brielle came in last, in a cream coat, already carrying herself like the lady of a house she'd never set foot into clean. They took the 3 chairs nearest Marcus. I sat slightly apart, my bag in my lap, the sealed letter and the folder inside it. Why don't you sit with us, Ellie? My mother said sweetly, performing for the lawyer. We're family. I'm fine here, I said. Marcus opened a folder. Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here for the reading of the last will and testament of Ruth Eleanor Vance. He began to read the first will, the one they'd engineered. I watched my family the whole time. I watched my mother's hand find my father's. I watched Brielle's chin lift. When Marcus read that the house, the bonds, and the accounts passed to Brielle, my sister let out a small, satisfied breath. When he read my portion, $10,000 and her appreciation, my mother turned to me with a look of practiced, pitying sympathy. "We're sorry, sweetheart," she said softly, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "It's what Mother wanted." My father leaned back. "Well, that's settled, then. We appreciate you handling this, Mr. Holloway. We'll be in touch about transferring the deed." And here is the moment I had waited 6 days for. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand. I simply opened my bag, set my grandmother's recipe box on the table in front of me, the burnt cookie box, and said, calmly, "Mr. Holloway. Wasn't there a second document?" The room went still. Marcus looked up from the folder, and for the first time, he allowed himself the smallest of smiles. He cleared his throat. "There is," he said. "Filed 11 months ago. It supersedes everything I've just read." My mother's pearls rose and fell as her breath caught. My father's hand went flat on the table. Brielle's cream coat suddenly looked like a costume she'd worn to the wrong play. "That's not possible," my father said. "There's no second will." "There is," Marcus said evenly, "and I have it here, properly witnessed, accompanied by a physician's attestation of sound mind and a recorded video statement by Mrs. Vance herself." He looked at each of them, then at me. "Shall I continue?" Nobody moved. The sunflower clock wasn't there, but I swear I heard it ticking anyway. Marcus Holloway read the second will in the same unhurried voice he'd used for the first, and I watched my family's certainty collapse one sentence at a time. When he read that Brielle would receive $10,000, the exact amount they'd left me, my sister made a sound like she'd been struck. When he read that the house on Maple Hollow Road, the bonds, and the entirety of Ruth Vance's accounts passed to my granddaughter Eleanor, who chose me first when it cost her something to do so, my mother's face drained to the color of the conference room walls. The first wave broke immediately. "This is fraud," my father said, half rising. She was sick. She wasn't competent. Someone manipulated her, Eleanor manipulated her, she was alone with her constantly. Marcus didn't flinch. He reached for a remote and turned the monitor on the wall to life. And there she was. Grandma Ruth, sitting upright in her bedroom in that pale gold light, the blue address book on her lap, looking directly into the camera. "My name is Ruth Eleanor Vance. I am of sound mind, as my doctor will confirm, and I'm making this will of my own free choice. My son Roland and his wife Diane arranged for my granddaughter Brielle to take me to a lawyer 2 years ago and have me sign papers I barely understood. I signed them because I was tired, and because I wanted to see who would show up when it mattered. Eleanor showed up. Every week. She held my hand. They held my brochures." A pause, and then my grandmother smiled at the camera, sharp as ever. "I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing it out of accuracy. Love is about what you choose first. I'm finally choosing out loud." The screen went dark. The silence in the room was total. The second wave came from Marcus, calm and devastating. "Should the prior will be contested, this video, the physician's letter, and the 2 independent witnesses will be presented. I'll also note that the witnesses are entirely unconnected to Eleanor. Your mother chose them precisely so they couldn't be accused of bias." He folded his hands. "Furthermore, the realtor your family engaged to list the property last week did so without legal ownership. The listing has already been flagged. I'd strongly advise withdrawing it before it becomes a separate matter." My father sat down slowly. "We'll fight this," he said, but the words had no floor under them. "You're welcome to try," Marcus said. "A contest against a will this thoroughly documented will cost more in legal fees than the $10,000 Brielle stands to receive, which you would risk losing entirely if the court finds the contest frivolous, given the evidence of your own attempt to alter a prior will. He let that land. I've seen families spend $100,000 to lose 10. I don't recommend it. The third wave was the quietest and the cruelest, and it came not from the law but from the truth of the room. Brielle turned to our parents, her voice cracking. You said she'd never know. You told me it was handled. My mother couldn't look at her. My father stared at the table. The plan they'd built in a den 2 years ago, in whispered arithmetic over a dying woman's accounts, had not just failed. It had been recorded, witnessed, and read back to them in their mother's own voice. There was nothing left to take. There was only what was left of them. 10. Consequences domino phase. I'd love to tell you I felt triumphant walking out of that office. I didn't. What I felt was tired, the specific exhaustion of a wound finally closing, which is its own kind of ache. The second wave came from Marcus, calm and devastating. Should the prior will be contested, this video, the physician's letter, and the 2 independent witnesses will be presented. I'll also note that the witnesses are entirely unconnected to Eleanor. Your mother chose them precisely so they couldn't be accused of bias. He folded his hands. Furthermore, the realtor your family engaged to list the property last week did so without legal ownership. The listing has already been flagged. I'd strongly advise withdrawing it before it becomes a separate matter. My father sat down slowly. We'll fight this, he said, but the words had no floor under them. You're welcome to try, Marcus said. A contest against a will this thoroughly documented will cost more in legal fees than the $10,000 Brielle stands to receive, which you would risk losing entirely if the court finds the contest frivolous, given the evidence of your own attempt to alter a prior will. He let that land. I've seen families spend $100,000 to lose 10. I don't recommend it. The third wave was the quietest and the cruelest, and it came not from the law but from the truth of the room. Brielle turned to our parents, her voice cracking. You said she'd never know. You told me it was handled. My mother couldn't look at her. My father stared at the table. The plan they'd built in a den 2 years ago, in whispered arithmetic over a dying woman's accounts, had not just failed. It had been recorded, witnessed, and read back to them in their mother's own voice. There was nothing left to take. There was only what was left of them. I'd love to tell you I felt triumphant walking out of that office. I didn't. What I felt was tired, the specific exhaustion of a wound finally closing, which is its own kind of ache. The fallout came in pieces over the following weeks. My parents consulted a lawyer of their own, who told them exactly what Marcus had. A contest was unwinnable and likely to backfire. They dropped it. The house listing was withdrawn, but not before a neighbor had seen it, and small towns talk. The story made its quiet rounds. Roland and Diane tried to cut Ruth's other granddaughter out, and it turned out Ruth had cut them out first. My parents stopped attending their usual church coffee hour for a while. Brielle's sage green kitchen plans dissolved into nothing. She'd already, I learned later, borrowed against an inheritance she now wouldn't receive, and had to unwind a deposit on furniture she'd ordered for a house that was never hers. She didn't call to apologize. She called once, weeks later, to ask if I'd at least split it, as sisters. I told her I'd think about it. I haven't stopped thinking about it. I just haven't said yes. My parents and I didn't speak for over a month. When my mother finally called, her voice had lost its sweetness. What was left underneath was something I'd never heard from her: uncertainty. I don't understand how it came to this, she said. I told her the truth. It came to this in a den, 2 years ago, in a sentence about a pen and a dying woman. She went quiet. We have spoken a few times since. It is careful, and small, and honest in a way it never was before. I don't know if it will grow into anything. I've stopped needing it to. I didn't get a victory. I got an ending. Sometimes those are the same shape, but they don't feel the same in your chest. A week after the reading, I drove out to Maple Hollow Road and let myself into the house that was now, impossibly, mine. It smelled the same. Cinnamon and dish soap and that warmth baked into the walls. The sunflower clock ticked a half-second slow above the stove. The water ring was still on the table by the window, some marks you keep on purpose. I sat in my grandmother's chair, in the pale gold light, and finally I took out the sealed letter. For Ellie. After. My hand shook as I opened it. My Ellie, if you're reading this, then it's done, and you're sitting in my kitchen, and I hope the kettle is on. Put it on, would you? Humor an old woman. I know what they did, and I know what I did, and I want you to know I'm not sorry. Not for the will, for the way I let them believe, for 2 years, that they'd won. I needed to see it clearly. So did you. People will tell you who they are if you give them enough rope and a reason. I gave them both. Don't let this make you hard, Ellie. That's my real fear, not that they'll take the house, but that they'll take your softness. Keep it. Softness that survives is the strongest thing there is. You held my hand when it cost you sleep and gas money and your own peace, and you never once mentioned a will. That's how I knew. The ones who love you don't count the slices. One more thing. In the bottom drawer of my dresser, under the lining, there's an envelope. I set aside $10,000 in cash, separate from everything, years ago. They wanted to give you $10,000 and call it appreciation. So here is $10,000 from me, and the only word attached to it is love. Spend it on something that has nothing to do with any of them. Take a trip. Buy a ridiculous coffee mug. Leave a water ring somewhere. Choose first, my girl. Always. Grandma Ruth. I found the envelope exactly where she said. $10,000, the precise sum they'd offered as my whole worth, returned to me as a private joke and a final, fierce act of love. I sat on her bedroom floor and cried until the light went amber, and then I put the kettle on, because she asked me to. I live in the house on Maple Hollow Road now. I kept the wallpaper. I kept the clock. I kept the water ring. I didn't beat my family. There's no winning a game where the prize is realizing the people who were supposed to love you first were counting your slices the whole time. You don't get a trophy for that. You get a quiet kitchen and a truth you can finally set down. But here's what I learned, and what I want to leave with you: peace doesn't come from revenge. I never raised my voice. I never had to. The truth my grandmother wrote down, witnessed, and spoke aloud did all the work that anger would have done badly. Justice that's calm is still justice. Sometimes it's the only kind that lets you sleep afterward. If you're listening to this and you feel like the people around you are measuring you, weighing you, choosing you last, I want you to hear me. The right people don't count what's left over. They choose you first, even when it costs them something. And sometimes, the ones who love you most are quietly building you a shelter you won't discover until the storm has already passed. So let me ask you this, and I read every single comment: who in your life chose you first when it cost them something? Tell me about them. Say their name. Let's fill the comments with the people who got it right. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, or relieved, or just a little less alone, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you here for the next story. Check the description for more. I'll see you next time. Put the kettle on.